Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm excited to go over a case study with you and walk through a requirements gathering and elicitation process. So a couple weeks ago, I created a poll to see how many of you are interested in this topic, and I was actually very surprised that close to 60% of you chose this topic. So I decided to cover this for today's video. With that being in mind, let's talk about requirements elicitation. So by definition, requirements elicitation is the practice of researching and discovering the requirements of a system from users, customers, and other stakeholders. The practice is also sometimes referred to as requirements gathering. And I have to admit, I laughed out loud as soon as I saw this little comic strip because it actually captures number one struggles of being a business analyst, especially on the system side. So, as an analyst, right, I need to know and understand what do you want. What do you want from the system? And then the business comes back and say, I want you to design the software for me. And then we go back and say, but what do you want to do with the software? And then business comes back and say, I don't know until you tell me what the software can do. And then we have to go back and tell them, well, I can design the software to do anything. And the business comes back and says, can you design the software to tell you my requirements, right? So, like I mentioned in one of my videos, one of the biggest challenges of being a business analyst is sometimes that business stakeholders themselves don't know exactly what they want, or they cannot visualize what exactly they need the system to do things for them. You know what this reminds me of? This is almost, if I can use an analogy, this is almost like you're telling a realtor, hey, I want to buy a house. And then once the realtor goes like, okay, what kind of a house are you looking for? What's your budget? Are you going to live in it? And then customers saying, I have no idea. Why don't you tell me what kind of a house I want, right? So this is exactly the, similar type of question, right? Like when you ask somebody, what are some of the system requirements or capabilities or functionalities do you want from the system? The customer just looks at you blankly. And so a really good business analyst can dig really deep and understand what the business wants and what the business actually needs. And that's why requirements elicitation or gathering process is the most critical part of successful project implementation, but often gets overlooked because there's not enough time, there's not enough analysis. And I must say that personally, I believe that requirements elicitation process is the most important step before you can start designing the product, because depending on depending on what you define as requirements can really dictate the success or the failure of the project. So as systems business analyst, I've actually observed a lot of changes that companies go through in the last couple of years. And there are four main reasons why as to companies need to constantly adapt and change, especially when it comes to technology landscape. So number one is to be legally compliant. So they have to meet industry standards. They need to be able to produce certain reports for government regulations. And it's also because their internal business policies change all the time. Number two, capital projects. So companies engage in capital projects to grow and adapt. And this is really more to propel growth and gain competitive advantage within their market, or to gain an advantage. So this sometimes includes implementation or upgrades to, cloud-based softwares and system or SaaS-based solutions. This can be adopting of automated bots and AI to gain competitive advantage. In my past video, I talked about how the future of works is going to change due to rapid growth in technology advancement, and one of them being AI. So if you guys haven't checked it out, please check it out. But for example, if you want to reduce customer wait time using AI, then that's another project that you need to implement, right? Also, another reason for capital projects is to gain market share, right? So, merger and acquisition. As you know, like if you just Google how many companies have Google and Amazon or any other companies have acquired over the last decade or so, you'd be amazed. I bet you there's about hundreds, if not thousands, of companies, smaller companies that these other big companies have acquired over the last decade or so. And I've been also working on a lot of post merger and acquisition integration. So I know that there are a lot of M&As that are happening in order to gain market share. And these would be all considered as capital projects because they're really to help the company grow and move forward, right? And number three, why do companies should change? Sometimes they have to do it because they need to reduce cost and or to outsource it and to increase their operational efficiency, right? So they have to reduce their manual costs by, implementing automated bots or to outsource certain business functions to, you know, other countries where the labor costs might be cheaper, to streamline business processes. And number four, last but not least, external environment factors. There's some unforeseen circumstances, right? So, for example, COVID, like I briefly talked about, has huge impact on airlines and hospitality industry, right? So, as a result of COVID, now airlines have to find a way to increase their bottom line or to reduce costs, right? So these are the main reasons why companies sometimes need to change, and that result in either projects or other types of work that you as a business analyst have to get involved in order to help deliver. Okay, so here's a case study. American airline executives warned employees late Wednesday that the airline will have to lay off as many as 25,000 frontline workers this fall because travel has not rebounded from the coronavirus crisis as they hoped. The job cuts, which cover unionized employees, including pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and airport workers, represent nearly 30% of the company's 85,000 frontline workers in its U.S. mainline operation. American previously cut 30% of its corporate staff, or 5,000 employees. American's revenue in June was 80% lower than June 2019. Woo! It's 80% lower than last year, the executive said, and travel demand is slowing again after an uptick due to a spike in COVID-19 infections and new travel restrictions and quarantines in place. The bottom line is the airline expects to have more than 20,000 more workers on its payroll than its needs for this fall as it shrinks its schedule to reflect the reality of depressed travel demand for the foreseeable future. Okay, the airline is sending notices to 25,000 workers. However, because the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, WARN, requires companies with mass job cuts looming to include employees who may be transferred, in addition to those facing layoffs. In American's case, the airline said its airport and tech operations teams face that possibility. Flight attendants face the biggest cuts, with notices going out to nearly 10,000 American flight attendants. Okay, so here's the situation. You're a business analyst working for American Airlines. HR director sends you the memo and pulls you aside and asks if there is a way in the payroll system to mass update up to 25,000 employees who are impacted by this change. Currently, manually updating every single employee transaction will cost too much money and time for a payroll team. They are already overloaded with other operational activities. She wants an answer by the end of the week, and today's Tuesday. What should you do as a business analyst? What are your next steps? Here is an exercise. So write down, I want you to take a piece of paper and write down a list of questions that come to your mind right now. Imagine what are the types of questions that you want to ask if you were the business analyst working on this project. Okay, so what should your next steps be? Number one, do not panic. Take a deep breath. That's always the first rule of thumb. Even if you want to say but, you know, but what do you mean I have to figure out, whether or not our system can do this massive layoff with such a short notice, right? And a good rule of thumb is understand these basic high level requirements before I even go deep into the detailed requirements, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Okay, so who is impacted, right? We know that this is going to impact unionized employees, including pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and airport workers, right? And what is happening? Mass layoff of up to 25,000 workers. When? It's going to be this fall. So it could be any time between September and November, where they did not say which location. They just said it's going to be in the United States. Why? As I mentioned before, point number 3, why do companies need to change? To reduce cost, right? And that's exactly what's happening. How? So how you don't have to know right away because it often deals with like the actual design and implementation side. So you don't need to worry about it right now, but you should always think about it as you go through your requirement gathering process. If I were the BA, I would say, okay, Jennifer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into this for you with the development team, and I'm going to let you know and give you an update by the end of the week. But I can't promise you that it can be delivered right away because I have to understand what the requirements are. Is there a subject matter expert or business prime who I can reach out to if in case I have questions, right? So that's basically the approach that I would take. I wouldn't say yes or no. I would always say yes, but I need to look into it further, right? So then what I would do is I would set up a separate meeting with the business prime to elicit and gather more detailed requirements. So this is very, very important, and I think this is where a lot of BAs get really confused and they get lost is, who's the right decision maker, right? Who's the right person who can help me with the requirements. And oftentimes, the more senior somebody's position is within the organization, they don't really have all the detailed requirements because their job is not to be in the trenches. Their day-to-day job is more strategic, and so they can give you a direction or decision, but they cannot be the ones who understand operational activities that are happening day to day. Oftentimes it's operation managers or supervisors or lead hands or, people who are actually working with the system day to day that's going to actually know what are the requirements that need to be provided for this change to happen. So, your actual meeting with the business prime or subject matter expert. Rule number 1, so you have to be prepared for your meeting. So what I would do is I would actually brainstorm a list of questions. So I ask you to write down a list of questions that come to your mind. So take a look at that, right? Some of the questions that I would ask is, what are some of the types of employees that are impacted, right? Are they all going to be full-time, part-time, temp, or a mix of all three, right? So you have to understand what are the different types of employees who are going to be impacted by this layoff. What is the timeline? What is the effective date of separation that we're going to use in the system to process this massive layoff, right? And then I would also go into the system, whatever you use, right? Like it could be It could be SuccessFactor, it could be SAP, it could be Workday, it could be any system that you currently use, and then just go into the system for further analysis. So these are sort of the functional requirements that you're trying to gather. What kind of information do I need, right? I need employee ID, right? I need employee name, I need their job titles, I need their employee status. Are they full-time, part-time, temporary, which department they're in, right? What is the name of their manager in case we need to send emails to the managers or notifications from the system, right? So this is what I would call as preliminary system analysis, where I can go into the system and take a look to see what are all the information that are needed for us to successfully process this separation. And then what I would do then is to create a list of questions in preparation for the meeting with a business subject matter expert. And then this is what I normally actually do in order to be prepared for any kind of meeting with a business prime. And secondly, when you're actually attending that meeting, there are different types of requirements that you need to capture, right? And so first of all, if you don't actually understand or if you can't follow what they're talking about, because sometimes business can talk about their business processes and they can just ramble on, make a note of it so then you can go back and ask more clarifying questions. So during the meeting, it's important to make a note of the different topics, but it's very important to capture some of the decisions and assumptions that you're making when you're facilitating the meetings or when you're attending meetings to get more information. And if you don't understand certain topics, make a note of it so you can go back and ask more questions at a later point. And some of the questions I could be asking is, do you have a list of all the employees who are impacted by this change? And another question you can ask is there any specific reason code that you want to use to process the separation, right? Because in the article, it mentioned that they're hoping to use different programs to limit the number or to reduce the number of layoffs for American Airlines. So it could be voluntary layoff, it could be involuntary layoff, it could be a massive layoff, or it could be an early retirement, right? For some people. So, and then you can also ask about the output reports for auditing purpose. And you can also make a note about non-functional requirements, which is an ability for this new automated program to handle and process 25,000 records at once, right? So maybe the business is asking you to build a program in their system where if they provide you with an Excel spreadsheet of all of the 25,000 employees that are identified, maybe, the program should just be able to handle all 25,000 records at once, and that would be considered as a non-functional requirement, right? Because it's not something that it's more to do with the system capacity versus the actual functional requirement of the system. And then you also have to make sure that take good notes during the meeting, write down any of the decision points and any assumptions that were made. So now I want to bring it all back together by talking about different requirements classification. So for our American Airlines case study, what do you think the business requirement is? It is mainly to reduce costs, right? As we read in the article, their revenue has declined by 80%. And that means that they can't afford to have all these extra headcounts, and that's the main reason why they're going to have a massive layoff of up to 25,000 people. And stakeholder requirements, HR director, HR managers, payroll managers, they're asking you to basically help them manage their operations need because they don't have the capacity to process all 25,000 records within that short time frame, right? And so then this is where during the requirement elicitation process, you identify what must the solution do, right? So we said that, okay, maybe this, requires a program in our system where it can automatically, if you upload the information of 25,000 employees in an Excel spreadsheet, it should be able to mass process. It should be able to process 25,000 records at once, right? So that's the functional requirement. And we also talked about the need for auditing some of the reports and also the performance, right? Performance of being able to handle 25,000 records at once. So that would be considered an example of non-functional requirement. In today's video, I wanted to walk you through a real life example of how to identify business requirements, stakeholder requirements, both functional and non-functional requirements. And sometimes it could get more complex depending on dependencies, limitations, external interfaces. It gets actually quite more complex as there are many different rules and calculation that can come into play. But I'm not going to go into those business rules or transition requirements, but I wanted to give you guys a sense of what it would look like to go through a real life scenario and then walking through these different types of requirements with you. Okay, so after the meeting, you should definitely send out the meeting notes, especially if you're the one who hosted the meeting, and then capture a list of follow-up action items, any calculation that's required, list of employees, dates and timeline that need to be confirmed, or sample of report. And then you can also ask for input from specific stakeholders. So oftentimes what I do is I ask somebody and I designate somebody specifically to confirm point number 1 or point number 2, because if you just ask everybody in general, nobody's going to respond to you. It's better to be specific when you have a question. So you can say, okay, Jeff, can you please confirm point number 1? Then it's harder to say no, right? These are all the tactics that you can use. And then you can also work with your development team on the design and submit requirements documents. So I'm not going to go into this step today because I already have a YouTube video created just specifically talking about submitting requirements documents and different sections in another video. So you guys can definitely check that out if that's something that you want to learn more. In summary, I just wanted to give you 3 different types of business analysts, right? There's the bad BAs who never ask any kind of questions. They go into meetings without any preparation and completely miss requirements. So it's a hit or miss if they actually capture the requirements. Good business analysts ask good questions and follow up, but sometimes forget to identify and close all the gaps. Great BAs, in my mind, do analysis before pre-analysis. They come prepared with a list of questions. They ask excellent questions, the ones that people haven't thought of, and follow up to close any outstanding items or to close gaps after the fact. And you don't have to know all the answers in that meeting with your business stakeholders, but as long as you can follow up and provide information later on, I think that's also a really good trait of a business analyst, is to follow up and follow through. So that's it for today's video. I hope you guys liked it. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Bye!